Well, welcome, Des Tong. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure, mate.
Okay. You've been a musician for many, many years, obviously. Where did it all start?
Yeah, well, when I was about 10, my
Hmm.
dad was a pianist, fantastic pianist. He used to play around all the hotels and the clubs and places in Manchester.
Hmm.
And he bought me a battered old double bass, which he insisted that if I was going to play a musical instrument, it was going to be bass.
Right.
So, and I had a few lessons at school, and the story there is that my school didn't have a music policy.
Hmm.
So my double bass lessons were in the cricket pavilion where they kept the stumps and the pads
Right.
at lunchtime. And
Hmm.
one day I was about 2 or 3 minutes back to registration, and my teacher asked me where I'd been, and I said, "Well, I'm sorry, sir, I've been having my double bass lesson." And he made me stand in front of the class and he said, "When will you realize you will never make a living from playing music?" Now, is that a challenge or is that a challenge? So, when I all of a sudden I was playing in my dad's trio, and we were playing lots of little, bars and hotels and various functions and things like that. But suddenly realized that all my mates at school were into the Stones and the Beatles and the Small Faces and what have you. So double bass wasn't really the instrument to be playing. So I bought myself a bass guitar, which I
Right.
still have. Fender Precision, fantastic instrument. And so I was in a little band with three other pals playing soul music. But I was approached by another band who were all older than me, a
Hmm.
lot older than me. But they'd seen me play, and they were looking for a bass player. So yeah, I joined them, and the experience I got was incredible because they'd all been there and done it at some point or other. So to be working with these guys on a regular basis was fantastic. I
Hmm.
just got so much inspiration and experience, So
Yeah.
then I got a call from a friend who I was at school with, who was a sax player, and he had a band, and he said he'd been offered a load of work backing American soul artists who were coming over to the UK.
Yeah.
Would I be up for that? So at the time, I was working in the bank. I'd left school, and but yeah, I mean, why not? So the first lot was Inez and Charlie Fox,
Hmm.
with rocking Mockingbird, I should say, and they were fantastic. We did the Twisted Wheel in Manchester with them. We did an outrageous double at the Twisted Wheel. The first show, it was a Saturday night. The first show was in Boston, in Lincolnshire,
Hmm.
at a place called the Gliderdrome. And the second show was at the Twisted Wheel in Manchester at about 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
Just no motorways, and you just covered outrageous mileage. But you could, because there wasn't as much traffic on the road as there is now, and you just did it.
Hmm.
And then the second artist was Ines, not Ines Foss, Fontella Bass, who did Rescue Me.
Hmm.
So we started working with other acts, and one of them was called the Chants from Liverpool, five guys from Liverpool, and they offered me a job as their musical director, because they were doing the clubs and they were using bands, and they wanted somebody there to conduct them, and so yeah, I took that. Within a month, I was in Belgium, in Brussels, for a month in a club, and then we came back, and then we went to Mallorca and
Hmm.
played a place called Tito's in Mallorca, which was a fantastic nightclub for a month, and came back, and then we went to Germany and played the American bases. So suddenly I was all over Europe. Uh, I was what, 19?
Mm,
So it was fantastic, and from them I went on. Eventually ended up with the Real Thing,
mm,
and was working with them. Then I met Jimmy Helms, another great soul singer. Worked with him, and I probably spent the first 10, 15 years in a transit van going up and down the motorway, doing outrageous mileage. I mean,
yeah.
we used to do things like we were in Manchester. We'd drive down to Southend, do a show at Southend in the club called the Zero Six, and
Mm.
then drive back the same night. I mean, mental. But eventually, I met some guys from Manchester,
Mm,
keyboard player and a drummer, wonderful guys. And they introduced me to the session scene in Manchester.
mm.
And this was around the late sort of 70s. Um, I'd done a crazy tour. I was in a band called the Dougie James Soul Train, which was an irreverent bunch of guys who played soul music, and it was great. But we toured with the Jacksons,
All right.
and it was it was amazing. I mean, they Michael had this was like 1979, I think,
Mm,
and Michael had come back and agreed to do a tour with his brothers. We played one place in Birmingham called Bingley Hall, which was like a big exhibition centre, um, and there was only one dressing room.
right.
And so we shared a dressing room with the Jacksons, which we were in one corner, the rough and ready bunch, and they were in the other corner having a prayer meeting before they went on stage.
Right.
And then, I mean, shortly after that, Michael Jackson recorded "Off the Wall."
Mm,
So, I mean, he was on fire. He was incredible.
mm.
But I was into session playing, so I'm working with all sorts of people. Lisa Stansfield. I really don't tell anybody this, but I actually played on the Matchstalk Men #1.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
Right.
but that's a secret. Um, um, and then whilst I was doing all these sessions, I was regularly bumping into Paul Young,
Oh,
who
yeah.
was with
Yeah.
Sad Cafe,
Mm.
as well as Vic Emerson, the keyboard player, and Ian Wilson, the guitarist. And one day in like 1981, I think it was, Paul rang me up, uh, called me Desley. That was his nickname for me. He said, Desley, can you come round to the house? I want you to play on a track I've got. Now, Paul did a lot of side projects as well as Sad Cafe. So I assumed it was one of those. And um, I turned up at his house. He played me the track. I put a bass line on it. He loved it. He said, can you come to Strawberry Studios tonight and do it? So I said, yeah, fine. Yeah, okay. So I went down to Strawberry that night and walked in, and Sad Cafe was sitting in the control room,
Right.
which was a bit of a shock. Um, but I played the track. They all loved it. Um, and he said, can you come back and do another one tomorrow night?
Mm.
So I went back the next night, and then the bass player walked in. But he came straight over and he said, look, I'm backing out of the band. I'm going into management. So Paul wants you in the band. Would you be up for doing the rest of the album? So, yeah, ka-ching. Um, so I finished the album. It was called Olay. And then they said, well, we're going to do a tour. Do you fancy doing that? Wow. Yeah. Now that to me was a massive culture shock because, I'd been doing sessions for a few years. I was in about four or five local bands
Mm.
playing pubs and clubs. Suddenly I'm playing to 5,000 people
Mm.
and I'm no longer a bass player in a band. I am now Des Tong in Sad Cafe
Yeah. Yeah.
because my photos in the program and people are waiting to speak to me and get autographs. And so it was like somebody said to me, "How long did it take you to get used to it?" I said, "One gig," because
Mm.
I didn't have any other chance. You just did it. Um, and I'm still with them today. In fact, we're doing a gig on Saturday with a new lineup.
Oh, cool. How did the songwriting work when you joined?
Well, they would already got a lot of their songs done. Although one of the it was crazy, really. We would sit in the studio at like £40 an hour and write songs. Come
Right.
up with somebody would have an idea, and we would sit down and work it out. And then Paul would go away or Ian would go away and write some lyrics, and that was how it happened.
Hmm.
It was a very It wasn't like today. I mean, today everybody's got their own studios. I've got my own studio. I'm sitting in it now. And you plot everything out. I work with a singer called Sissy Stone, and we've just done an album together. And I wrote all of the music in my studio. She then takes it away, writes the lyrics, and then she'll put a vocal down. But then we go into a studio in Birmingham that we use, and we mix it there. It's an analog studio, great sound, and so that's how that process works. Although as I say, in those days you didn't have the computers, you didn't have your home recording systems. You had to do it at £40 an hour. Crazy.
So how would it normally work then? Would one person do the lyrics, and would you all sort of write the music around it?
Well, it depended. I mean, sometimes somebody would come in with a lyric idea, and maybe they'd like Ian, for instance, would do his stuff with an acoustic guitar,
Hmm.
and then he'd come in and play it, and then myself and the drummer would start to work on it, and then uh, he would then put his electric guitar, his rhythm guitar on it, and then we'd have the basis of a rhythm section, um, and then Paul would do a vocal. Victor would then put the keyboards on. Maybe they put a guitar solo on, and that was how it was formed.
Hmm. Okay. Were there any sort of clashes musically? Because obviously there's a lot of really good musicians in there, and they're sort of quite strong, aren't they? Strong personalities.
Um, Not really. I mean, yes, Victor was a very strong personality,
Hmm.
um, and his keyboards were a major part of what they did.
Yeah.
Um, Paul again was Paul. I mean, he was just he was a Goliath when it comes to the vocals. I mean, he's
Hmm.
fantastic to work with. Um, Great loss. Uh, I mean, I had the pleasure of yeah, I mean, Paul passed in 2000. Now, a good friend of mine, a guy called Alistair Gordon, had been working with Paul for quite a while on a solo album.
Hmm.
And Paul had a little studio in his basement. Now, Alistair knew that there was all these tapes of ideas, demos, bits that Paul would wake up in the middle of the night and go down and record a chorus or something.
Hmm.
He knew that they were in this cellar, but he was reluctant to sort of do anything until the family had got over, you know.
Hmm.
So one day there was a knock on his door, and Paul's wife was there, and
Yeah.
she had a big cardboard box full of tapes and said, "Can you do anything with these?"
Oh wow.
What he did was he went to a studio in Gothenburg, and they first of all they had to bake the tapes
Right.
because well, there's this thing called sticky shed syndrome,
Right.
which if tapes are left too long and not stored properly, they can get damp, and the actual acetate will come off of the backing of the tape.
Right.
So what they do is they bake them in a very, very, very low oven for about 24 hours. And then you have about 10 passes where you can get good quality. So then they put them into computer. And what they did was they took all of the music off and just kept Paul's voice.
Right.
And then they recreated songs. So maybe some of them he'd done the majority, but some of them there was just a chorus. But
Yeah.
then they took a verse from something else and made up songs.
Right.
And I got a call, and Dave Irving, the drummer, got a call to go over to Stockholm, to Gothenburg, and re-record all the rhythm section on the album. It's called
Mm.
Chronicles, and it's a fantastic album. It was quite scary to be sitting there, and Paul's voice would suddenly come on,
Mhm.
to play to it.
Yeah.
Um, but that album was one of the reasons why Sad Cafe is going today, because quite a lot of people picked up on it and said,
Yeah.
well, why aren't Sad Cafe playing? And it was like, well, we haven't got a singer, but we sort of got round that, and we still do one of the tracks in the show today.
Was it a big surprise when Paul left to go to Mike and the Mechanics?
Um,
Mm.
there's a famous saying in the music industry, too much month at the end of the money. And Sad Cafe, along with a lot of other people, were suffering from that. I mean, I'd actually got into producing. I was approached by a couple of guys from the BBC up in Manchester, um, that if I would be up for producing Radio One and Radio Two sessions.
Yeah.
So I got into that. Victor had moved to Paris. Ashley had moved to Denmark.
Mm.
So, really, truly, there wasn't a band. But
Right.
but Paul was approached by Mike Rutherford,
Yeah.
and to basically audition for the Mechanics, and Paul Carrick went down, and Mike Rutherford couldn't choose between them. So in the end, he just said, "Well, I'll have you both,"
Mm.
and so they both joined.
Right. Okay. When you were touring with Sub Cafe, what were the most annoying habits when you were on the road?
Annoying habits. Um, well, we a lot of the time we were on tour buses,
Yeah.
nightliners. So, I mean, they were great because you could get on one at the beginning of the tour, and then um, you could travel from any 2 points overnight. So one time we did, what did we do? We went Glasgow to Southampton overnight.
Right. Wow.
So we did the gig in Glasgow. We went to bed in Glasgow, and then we woke up in outside the gig in Southampton. Um, and it was great, except I won't name the particular person, but there was one person that had a habit of raiding the fridge when everybody else went to bed. So
Mm.
you get up the next morning looking for I don't know, something you'd bought in the supermarket the day before, and it had gone, and that particular person was snoring in his bunk because he'd eaten the fridge. Yeah, no names.
But going back to the producing, obviously you started with the BBC, and didn't you do some stuff with Mick Hucknall as well?
Well, Simply Red were my first session for the BBC on
Mm.
Radio One. Um, it The whole Radio One situation was quite a challenge for some acts, because they'd spent probably the best part of a year recording an album,
Mm.
and they'd come to Manchester to the BBC, and they had from 10 till 6 to record 3 songs complete, which then I mixed the following day,
Right.
and then it went out on the Saturday.
Wow.
And it was quite a difficult transition for some of them, because they just couldn't come to grips with the fact that you can't do it 25 times. You've just done it twice. The second time is great. Move on.
Yeah.
And that taught me an awful lot doing that, because you very, very quickly learn that, especially when the clock's ticking, which work, and that one works, right, move on, you know.
Yeah.
And I work with like Erasure,
Hmm.
um, Spear of Destiny, They were Kirk Brandon. They were brilliant. Richard Thompson was one.
Oh,
In fact, Richard was great because he recorded everything at the same time,
hmm.
as did Vince Clarke. Vince Clarke was fun because he had about 15 keyboards,
Yeah.
all linked up to a BBC micro, and it had like one of these, I don't know, 9-inch floppy disks, and flaky as hell. I mean, you know, and I said to him, because we just zipped through this session really quickly, and again, Andy Bell, the singer, did it live with as it was going down, so
Hmm.
it was all done in one. But I said to Vince, what do you do? Do you take this live? And he went, yeah. So I
Hmm.
said, well, what happens if somebody kicks the plug out? He says, well, we just start again. He's very matter of fact, just
Yeah.
start again. But the experience from doing those sessions was invaluable because I mean I then did Damien, the Time Warp.
Yeah.
Um, I'd been approached by Nigel Martin Smith, who was his manager, and he wanted to do a dance version that, in his words, Julie and Sheila can dance around the handbags to on a Saturday night
Right.
of the Time Warp. So, so what I did was I took it and I took it away from the rock and roll that as it was in the film and the theatre show, and I did like a Stock Waterman and Aitken version.
Hmm.
Um, and ironically, just before Christmas, I was invited to a premiere of Stephen Knight's show, This Town, I think it was called, in the town hall in Birmingham, and Pete Waterman was there. And
Ah.
so we had a great conversation because we'd never actually met,
Hmm.
but Pete Waterman remixed it for me.
Ah, okay,
And
cool.
as I'm sitting there and I'm looking at a silver disc on the wall, the sales in excess of 200,000,
Bloody hell.
which probably now be a platinum disc.
What do you think is the most important part of producing? I mean, are you sometimes tempted to sort of put your own stamp on it musically?
Well, and there's two ways, really. I mean, I think to me, the most important part of production is just the artist, is guiding the artist, being that person that in between the music and the artist.
Mm,
I had this conversation with somebody the other day. I think a lot of people nowadays, um, when they try and produce themselves, but I think the secret is to accept that you need another pair of ears.
mm,
And sometimes you can say something to him, you can trigger uh, a reaction from the artist.
yeah.
I mentioned before with Sissy Stone, we go into this studio in Birmingham, and there's a great engineer there, guy called Toby Wilson. And Toby's a musician, he's a drummer,
Mm,
but I'm not going to say he's opinionated, but he's not frightened to give his opinion as an
right.
engineer. Now, I've done all the work, music wise, but it's great to be able to sit there and then have him turn around and go, have you thought about doing that?
Mm.
Or that doesn't work there. And all of a sudden you go, oh my God, yeah, it doesn't, does it? Now, I'd been working with that all along, and
Yeah.
suddenly I've got this other pair of ears who I trust telling me, no, take that out. So we
Mm,
do.
right.
And,
Okay.
and that I think is quite important from
Yeah.
a producer's point of view. A lot of producers, yeah, they do have their own that stamp their own authority. Like Trevor Horn, for instance, has his own um, group of people that he would use to create sound,
Yeah.
and quite often take just the singer. I mean, it goes right back a lot of times. Um, the band would go in and end up with just the singer playing because the rest of it had been done by session musicians.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it worked like that because it had to. You couldn't have a band going in who didn't really know what they were doing, and the drummer slowed down, or. Um, so I mean, I did a series when I was working in local TV. I spoke to I spoke to various people that I knew in the industry, and they it was interesting. Clem Catini, I think I just clicked something on. Clem Catini is a drummer. He's played on 32 number one records,
Wow.
and we had a great conversation. What he was saying was that he would get a call to go in and play on stuff. He didn't know what it was most of the time. He would just play. But it turns out he did most of the Kinks stuff
Oh, right. Okay.
because the Kinks drummer couldn't really play in time.
Ah, right.
So they would get Clem to go in. He played on T-Rex's stuff,
Right.
and all sorts of stuff. Walker Brothers, uh, Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, Shaking All Over, things. Telstar, he was in the Tornadoes. But
Right.
Clem could play in time, and that's what the producers realized that
Yeah.
they needed somebody like him to nail it down. The last thing you want as a producer is your drummer slowing down or speeding up, especially when you're going to put overdubs on.
Yeah, yeah. You worked in computer games, haven't you? Because that was quite interesting as well. Because
Yes, I did. I was asked to. It was the late 90s, and I knew a guy called Jeff Brown who had US Gold, and he was a musician from way back, and we'd met in Birmingham. So he he was looking for a musical director because it was at the time when the games music in particular was moving from being just chip music to go on to CD,
yeah,
and that meant that you could have real musicians.
yeah.
So Jeff knew that I worked with real musicians and produced that. So he asked me to join. And it was very interesting. I mean, to be absolutely honest, I can't stand computer games.
Me too.
My kids do. My son, loves them, but I just found it a challenge.
Yeah.
And I got there was one game I did, Johnny Bazooka Tone, which was it was about a guitar thing playing character, and he used his guitar to destroy and all that sort of stuff. But I used Mike Hare, who was with Sad Cafe, as the guitarist,
Yeah.
and I also used Snake Davis, the sax player, who was with M People,
Okay.
and I also did a theme tune which I got Sissy to sing on Johnny Bazooka Tone. I did The Incredible Hulk,
Hmm.
and also Roll Cage. But now Roll Cage was drum and bass,
Right.
which was completely alien to me. But it
Yeah.
was again, I just got my head into it, and I did the PC version. And it's interesting, people are still posting stuff online on YouTube,
Hmm.
and saying, I've had great compliments, like the PC version music is better than, because they Sony hired what do they call it, synced with like tracks from Fatboy Slim and
Hmm.
all various other people. But the gamers were saying, well, we prefer the other version because it suits the game better.
Yeah.
And I would tend to do that, especially with Johnny Bazooka Tone and the Hulk. We would look at the actual scenes
Yeah.
and levels, and then try and match the style of the music
Hmm.
to the game.
Right. Okay. What sort of challenges did you get in terms of memory? Was it memory? Did you have to work around memory, or was it just like a free hand
Well, there wasn't a problem then because it was
on
CD
CD?
based.
Yeah.
So it was actually just streaming off the CD.
I see. Okay. What sort of direction did you get? Did you get any sort of, it has to be this sort of way in terms of how it sounded, or?
There were, yeah, there was quite a lot of it could get a bit sticky because there was one where you had all the programmers deciding what the music should be.
Right.
But there was about six different styles of music all coming out of the programmers. So
Mm.
exactly which one do you want? And nobody could give me a definitive answer. So in the end, I
Yeah.
got what I thought. But it's you try and you try and sort of go along with make everybody happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's a time when you have to say, well, look, I think it should be like this, and unless
Mm.
you're going to do it, I'm doing it, so that's how it's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I got some great reviews from the music, so yeah. But
Mm.
I sort of got to a point where it was time to move on.
Yeah.
You it was good. But I just thought, well, I've done that now, and I
Yeah.
need a new challenge. I'm never one to resist a challenge.
So I know you're still touring with Sad Cafe. Have you got any other projects on the go at the moment?
Yeah, well, just before lockdown. Well, so when I left the computer games, I ended up in local television.
Okay.
I
Oh
was asked
yeah.
to join local TV as a
Uh,
producer, which was yeah, okay. That sounds like a challenge. So, within a week of joining, I was actually editing the programs I was producing because it was quite a small company
yeah.
and we all sort of chipped in with, doing everything. Um, and then shortly after that, there was a time when one of the programs was called um, Life Stories
Right.
and which was presented by one of the main guys, and he was doing things like 92-year-old wing walkers and Auschwitz survivors and
Mm.
a blind marathon runner and things like that. And somebody said to him, "Could we not have a bit of entertainment?" So he said to me, "Who do we know, Des?" And I suggested a guy called Jim Simpson, who runs the every year he runs the jazz festival in Birmingham,
Mm.
and also he was Black Sabbath's first manager,
Oh, okay.
and he's great. I mean, he's got loads of stories. So I called him up, and Jim goes to the opening of an envelope. He's that sort of guy. And he said, "Yeah, I'll come in." So he came in the next day. Now, the guy who was supposed to do it was panicking. He said, "I don't know him, but you do. So you do it." Now, this was never on my to-do list. I used to love watching Parkinson and I used to love watching all those sort of uh, interview programs, Terry Wogan, but I'd never had myself down as doing that.
Mm.
Anyway, I had to zip tie to buy myself a shirt and a razor. And so Jim came in, and of course I knew Jim, so we just sat down and had a chat.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, everybody applauded, and they said, "You got to do another one." So I called up Brian Travers, and Brian Travers was a sax player with UB40,
Yeah.
who again I'd known for years. Lovely, sadly no longer with us. And Brian was the wonderful interviewee, the most amazing because he never shut up, a bit like me, really. But his catchphrase was "no dead air," and he would just talk. And so we just sat down and started talking, and I'd have to wait for him to take a breath and then dive in with another question.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, and it just went on from there. So I just got the little black book out. Jasper Carrot came in,
Hmm.
Bev Bevan, um, Russ Ballard came
Mm.
one day, Colin Blunston, Paul Carrick, who you mentioned. But well, Paul, you see, I knew Paul because Paul had sung backing vocals on one track on a Sad Cafe album that I
Mm.
produced.
Yeah.
So it was great because all the people who were coming in, I had a connection with musically.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like they didn't know me or, I didn't know them. It was like we had a common link. So the questions were aimed at musically. They understood that I knew what I was talking about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so and it was great. I mean, I think I did about 20. They're all on YouTube.
Yeah.
Uh,
I've seen a few of them actually. Yeah.
and it was fun. I really, really enjoyed it. Um, and then uh, that sort of got to the point. Well, while I was doing that, I wrote a program called Streets of Birmingham Music.
Mm.
And what I did was I got Bev Bevan and we drove around Birmingham in a car. I drove and we talked about all the old venues
Mm.
and what some of them were still there, some of them weren't, some of them were car parks. But we went right back to uh, how he played at the Rum Runner, and I played at this Bingley Hall, and then there was Barbarella's, which was, I mean, Barbarella's. I did a week with the Four Tops in
Right.
1971, a week every night,
Wow. Mm.
Um, but the program, there was three programs. They were the most watched on local TV.
Mm.
And people would stop, and Bev kept saying to me, people would stop us in the street and say, I love that program. I met my wife in that club you were
Right.
talking about. Me and my mates used to go to that bar. We remember when, so, and it was all nostalgia.
Yeah.
So it really hit a spot. Um, and it was Sissy, my friend, said, why don't you write a book about it?
Mm.
And I thought, well, no, because the guy, Jim Simpson, the bloke I'd interviewed before, he's already written about three books.
Mm.
And there's a couple of others. So no, the amount of research you've got to do is incredible. And
Mm.
there's always somebody going to say, actually, it was a Tuesday night they played there, not a Wednesday, and that sort of thing. So what I did was, and this again, this is something I'd never ever thought about, was I created three characters and taking all the 5 decades of experience that I've got and sort of anecdotes that you hear and
Mm.
urban myths that you hear about and mixing them all up and seriously turning them upside down and inside out. So nobody can actually recognize what it is you're talking about. But
Yeah.
I wrote a story involving three characters, a club owner, his wife, and a musician. And again, I'd never thought about doing that.
Yeah.
But I like to read. I love reading and I like crime novels. So I wrote this story and it's got sex, drugs, rock and roll, violence, and terrorism. and this was just before lockdown.
Mm.
And Sad Cafe, we were playing at a club in Manchester, and a good friend of mine who I'd never actually met. She's a DJ on Radio Caroline,
Mm.
and she came over to see the show. And afterwards, we were talking, and I said to her, I said, "So DJ, is this what you do?" So she said, "No, I'm a proofreader."
Mm.
Ah,
Andy.
hello. So I sent her my book, and she
Mm.
got straight back to me, and she said, "I absolutely love it. I can't put it down. You got to, you've got to do some more." Um, and she helped me to edit it
Right.
and proofread it for me. And then lockdown hit. So during lockdown, I wrote every day,
Mm.
and I wrote four more books. And what I did was I made them continual. So I carried on from book one. The ending, there is an ending, but there's an opening. So what happens next? So then I carried on and did book two,
Mm.
and then three, and then four, and then five. So
Mm.
and they're 90,000 words each one.
Yeah.
So 2022, Sad Cafe were playing at the place called the Jam House in Birmingham. And a good friend of mine came with his friend. who happened to be a publisher. So we were talking after the show, and the publisher said, "Oh, Lee says that you've written a book. It's an autobiography, isn't it?" And I said, "No, it's a novel." "Oh, do you want to send it me?" Yeah. So I sent
Mm,
it to him, and 2 days later he said, "I love it. I,
mm.
I can't put it down. It's amazing. We got to do this." So I said, "Well, actually, there's another four." And so we agreed and we did a deal. And so that was April. And then May, the first book came out. It's
Right.
called Whatever It Takes, Babe. And the babe on the end is because it's come out on Amazon. And the thing about Amazon is they don't like titles that are the same. So there was about 20 called Whatever It Takes. So
Right.
we had to find a way. So I just said, well, whatever it takes, babe. And it's the catch line that the guy in the book says.
Mm,
So that enabled us to get it out straight away.
right.
Um, and then suddenly, I'm getting 5-star reviews for it.
Well.
And people are contacting me and saying, like, wow, this is amazing. When's the
Mm.
next one? And I'm meeting these wonderful people who are authors. Um, and it's like, it's another world.
Mm,
They're wonderful. There's some wonderful people who've been helping me and advising me. Um, and they're just such lovely people. I suppose it's because it's quite it's quite a sort of lonely occupation being an author because you're on your own all the time.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so they like the fact that they can talk to a similar person.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, so and then five turned into six because I get various people to proofread for me,
yeah.
and again, Sissy's one of them, and so I'd finished the fifth book, and that was it. That was going to be it. And I'd written an epilogue, and she said, "No, that's not an epilogue. That's the first chapter of book six." So, yeah, so I've done that now.
Mm,
Um, as I said, we've just had an album out,
mm,
uh, which which is great because um, we've got two albums out. The previous album, we've had three tracks in American TV dramas. We signed the album just before lockdown, and the company over there they specialize in sync.
yeah.
And the guy said, give us about 6 months because what we do is we make up like compilations and we send them out to various. Their core business is TV and film. And about 6, 7 months later, we got an email saying we just got one of your tracks in this drama
Mm.
um, called Work in Progress. And the problem is they're all in America and you can't see them over here, which is really annoying. But I did actually see one of them, and basically they were sitting. The characters were in a restaurant, and our track came on as the background music.
All right.
And that's how it works.
Yeah.
And then we got about a year later, we got another email to say that there's a program called Good Trouble,
Mm.
and they'd use one of the tracks. And then the Drew Carey show,
Ah,
which
okay.
which is, I mean, I'd never heard of it, but a lot of people do. Oh, right, And I looked up, and the promo for the new series has got 7 million views,
Wow.
and they've used one of our tracks,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh my God. So yeah, and then the new album, um, we put in touch with a guy called Julian Marsh, who's he's British, but he lives in Madrid, but he's a remixer.
Right.
And he took three tracks off the album and remixed them. And they've all been in the top 10 of the house music chart worldwide.
Mm.
It's a crazy way of doing it, but we're getting emails all the time from people in Tokyo, from Miami,
Mm.
uh, Canada, Buenos Aires, all over Europe, playing
Mm.
our tracks. And these DJs are sending us messages saying, "Wow, love your track. We're playing it."
So, how do you think the music's changed over the years in terms of like the charts and that sort of thing? Because one thing that I always think is that Top of the Pops, it was a family show, wasn't it? Everybody could watch Top of the Pops, and the variety of music was brilliant because you could have a punk band on, a heavy metal band, a
Yeah.
novelty record, and nowadays it seems to be sort of homogenized, is that the word, where everything seems to be sort of R&B dance tracks. Might just be me. So,
No, you're right. I mean, Radio One is, well, I can't listen to Radio One. I mean,
mm,
it's like being in a club,
yeah,
you know. Um, and of course, Radio Two then became the new Radio One with the new stuff. But even that's now disappearing. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know where you listen to music anymore.
yeah,
It's all online, isn't it?
yeah,
And unfortunately, Spotify, and
mm,
that is to me that is the kiss of death to music because the only people who make money from Spotify is Taylor Swift and Ed Sheeran.
yeah,
You've got to be turning over, you've got to be getting millions and millions of streams to earn any money.
yeah,
It's a sad state of affairs, really. Um, you know, you when I first joined Sad Cafe, the album came out and it was album sales, and
mm,
the fans would buy the album, and but
mm,
now, well, half the time they don't even pay for the streams. And so how do you earn money as a musician? Well,
yeah,
gigging is probably the main one, and merchandise.
yeah,
Gigging and merchandise, and you can sell your CDs at a gig. The last thing you want people to say is, I'll download it.
mm,
Well, if you're going to download it from Amazon or our website, but
yeah,
don't download it from Spotify
yeah,
because we don't get anything. It's like point naught 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 one of a penny.
yeah,
It's yeah, I don't know. I mean, I remember having a conversation with a young guy years ago, and we were talking about the album, and he says, "Oh yeah, yeah, I'll download it. Yeah, I'll get it. Don't worry." And I said, "Well, no, you need to pay for it. Why would I pay for it? I can get it for free."
yeah,
And that unfortunately is an attitude now that is very, very common.
yeah, yeah.
You
That's
know,
a shame, isn't it?
yeah, it is. It is.
Mm,
I think. I think. I don't think it will ever kill music because there will always be a new bunch of guys. I mean, I love the fact now there's a lot of guitar-based bands.
yeah,
The sort of like the 90s was all computerized, and
mm,
everybody was doing music on computer. Hey, I was as well.
mm,
But the one difference was I could play what
yeah,
I program, whereas a lot of guys can't. You
yeah,
just sit and do it on a computer. But now it's good to hear new bands out there playing guitars and doing it. And interesting, we got through our website, we got a contact from a girl in the States who just covered a Sad Cafe track called "Keeping It From the Troops." And
uh,
this girl's like 18
mm.
and she's got a band and it's really good, really good. And she contacted us to say, like, I've just wanted to know I've covered one of your tracks. Wow, amazing. Just won an award for like the best newcomer. So
Yeah,
it's lovely to see, that new generation of musicians.
yeah,
Uh, and we've got a couple of guys who there's been the odd occasion when our keyboard player is a very, very busy guy, and he couldn't make a gig, and he's got two students, and either one of them can sit in without a rehearsal and play the set. It's like, and they're like 19 and 20, and you're thinking, oh my God, but they're really, really good.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, thanks for joining us, Des. It's been a really interesting
Pleasure.
chat. Thanks for doing it.
Pleasure. Yeah, good to see you.
You too, mate. Thank you.